She stood beside her own grave, watching from a distance as life continued without her. Her husband had remarried, her children were growing up, and no one seemed able to see her. For years, she wandered between the cemetery and the house where she once lived, invisible, alone, until one day, someone finally did see her. But the strangest part of this story isn't that she died, it's how she died, because years earlier, she had tried to poison her husband. And the disturbing part of this story is that the poison worked, just not in the way she expected. I'm Alex, and you're now entering Between Worlds. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the beginning. From the outside, her life seemed almost perfect. She lived in a comfortable home. She had 3 young children. Her husband was a successful businessman. There was stability, security, a future that looked safe. She herself was a botanist. Her passion was studying plants. Behind the house, she kept a greenhouse filled with rare species collected from different parts of the world. To most people, they were simply beautiful plants. But she knew something most people didn't. Some of them could also produce powerful toxins, poisons capable of causing a death that looked completely natural. A sudden heart attack, no suspicion, no evidence. And one evening, everything changed. Her husband sat down with her and said something she never expected to hear. He had fallen in love with another woman and he wanted a divorce. At first, she tried to stay calm. She asked him to reconsider. She asked for time, 30 days. Maybe she could save the marriage. But as the days passed, one thing became clear. His decision was final, and slowly, her sadness turned into something darker. Jealousy, pride, fear of losing everything she had built. Then one thought began to grow in her mind, a dangerous thought. If she couldn't keep him, no one else would. Using her knowledge of plants, she prepared a poison, a carefully measured mixture, strong enough to stop the heart, but subtle enough to look like a natural death. 3 days before the divorce would become official, she decided to act. That evening, after dinner, they followed a routine they had shared for years. A glass of wine before going to bed. The house was quiet. The children were in their rooms. She went into the kitchen. Everything was ready. 2 glasses of wine sat on the table. One of them now carried a deadly secret. Just as she was about to sit down, a sudden cry came from the other room. One of the children had started crying. She sighed, stood up, and went to see what had happened. It's nothing serious, just a small fall and a frightened child. She comforted him and stayed with him for a moment until he calmed down. When she finally returned to the table, the atmosphere in the room felt heavy. Her husband was already sitting there, waiting. The silence between them was tense and uncomfortable. Without really thinking, she walked to the table and picked up one of the glasses. Almost automatically, she brought it to her lips and took a sip. The wine tasted normal. For a moment, nothing seemed unusual. But as she lowered the glass, a sudden thought flashed through her mind. The poison. Her heart skipped. She looked down at the glass in her hand, and in that instant, a terrifying realization struck her. She had no idea which glass she had just drunk from. A wave of panic rose in her chest. But by then, it was already too late. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then suddenly, a sharp pain exploded in her chest. Her breathing became difficult. The room began to spin. She staggered and collapsed onto the floor. In that moment, she understood. She had taken the wrong glass. The doctor later declared the cause of death as a heart attack. Family and friends gathered to say goodbye. Her children cried. Her husband mourned. And for everyone around her, that was the end of the story. But for her, something impossible was happening. She was still conscious. She saw the doctor examine her body. She heard him pronounce her death. She watched her own funeral. And then she watched herself being buried. Confused and terrified, she wandered between the cemetery and the house where she once lived. Years passed. She watched her children grow older. She watched her husband remarry. Another woman slowly took the place she once held. Sometimes she felt grateful that this new woman cared for her children, but other times, jealousy returned, regret, bitterness, and a strange sensation of suffocation that never seemed to disappear. For years, nothing changed, till one day, something extraordinary happened. Her son's wife visited the house. She stepped into the space where the greenhouse once stood, and suddenly she stopped. She looked directly at her. For the first time since her death, someone could see her. The young woman slowly approached and silently asked, "Who are you?" She answered, "I am your husband's mother," her mother-in-law. Instead of reacting with fear, the young woman said something simple. "Don't you know how to pray? Ask Jesus for help." She didn't know how. She had never practiced religion, never thought much about spirituality. So the young woman prayed for her, and something changed. For the first time in years, she felt peace, she felt sleepy, and she fell asleep. When she woke up, she was somewhere else, a place filled with people, some still alive, others like her, no longer in physical bodies. There she began to understand what had happened. Her body had died, but her consciousness had not. And the suffering she experienced was the consequence of her own actions. Now, Pay very close attention, because what happened here is not as simple as it seems. At first glance, it looks like a tragic mistake, but it wasn't just that. Because that night, she didn't just lose her life, she ended her own while carrying the intention to take someone else's, the father of her children. And that changes everything, because no matter what, those children would have suffered the consequences, one way or another. But here's something even more unsettling. This could have been worse. If her death had been properly investigated, her husband would have been the main suspect, the man she intended to kill, accused of killing her. And then ask yourself what would have happened to the children. No mother, and possibly no father either. This story comes from a psychographic account by Brazilian medium Vera Lúcia Marinzec de Carvalho, published in her book What I Found on the Other Side of Life, a free translation as there's no official English version. And if you've ever come across a story like this, a case of psychography, or something that suggests life beyond death, share it with us. Let's build a community around these experiences, because between worlds, there are still many stories waiting to be discovered. If you enjoy stories that explore the mysteries of consciousness and what may exist beyond death, consider subscribing to the channel. And if this story intrigued you, there is another remarkable case you might want to see. The story of a man many believe was the greatest medium who ever lived. You can discover it in the video appearing on your screen now.